Michael Ramirez is a two-time Pulitzer-winning political cartoonist who has both drawn and written for more than 400 publications nationwide, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and National Review. He currently co-manages the editorial pages at Investor's Business Daily, where his work is featured. Ramirez has also authored two books. His first, Everyone Has the Right to My Opinion, was published in 2008, and his second, Give Me Liberty or Give Me Obamacare, was published just last October. Please help me in welcoming Mr. Ramirez. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, there was this young man and he was on trial, and the judge was chastising him. He was saying, how could you possibly justify such a heinous crime? It's a terrible, terrible deed. Killing a California condor. There are only 27 of them left in the wild. What could possibly have been going through your mind to allow you to do such a terrible thing? The young man looked at the judge and he said, Your Honor, I was camping, I was out in the wilderness. I got lost, and as I wandered through some trees and some brush, I fell off this cliff and I landed on this ledge. I was stuck on this ledge for 7 days and 7 nights. With no food, no water. And I guess I looked pretty bad because this giant buzzard landed on top of me, started pecking at me. With the last ounce of strength in my body, I picked up a rock, I bashed him in the skull, and I ate him. It was a matter of survival. It was a matter of sustenance. The judge said, you know, that's a pretty good reason. I may just let you off. Just out of curiosity, what did it taste like? He said it was kind of a cross between a bald eagle and a spotted owl. A story with a twist, an element of humor to capture your attention, and then the fatal blow. In essence, that's editorial cartooning. And when people ask me what is an editorial cartoonist, I always say we're kind of a hybrid. We're a cross between Edward R. Murrow, Mark Stein, and the Son of Sam. Editorial cartoons are about concept. The illustration is merely a vehicle to convey a point of view. We're here to protect and inform the public, to attack and repel those who do not share our long-term philosophical interests. And, you know, basically you could say I get paid to be obnoxious. It's the only other profession besides being a professor or being a dentist where you get paid to be obnoxious. Politicians will have you think they're paid to be obnoxious. They're not paid to be, they're just obnoxious. That's why we have editorial cartoonists. It's a profession about ideas. 95% of what I do is concept or pushing a particular point of view. We are the pit bulls of journalism, and we're trained to attack at the slightest provocation. We're the prosecution, pushing for a rapid conviction and an immediate execution. We are the defense, punching holes in the arguments raised against our cause. We are judge, we are jury. And since I'm not a member of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, my judgments actually make sense. And we stand in judgment over the issues, and the sentence that we levy is swift and harsh. But in order to be judge and jury, clearly you have to be informed. You have to read and research. So I have a pretty boring job. I basically get paid to read and analyze. I start around 5 o'clock in the morning every day. And I watch the news at every half hour just to try to get a sense of what's being absorbed by the American consciousness. I read 4 papers a day. I read the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Orange County Register. A lot of people question whether the truth lies somewhere between the New York Times editorial page and the Wall Street Journal editorial page. It lies at michaelpramirez.com. I'm also a capitalist pig, so I'm a political analyst. I'm a political wonk. I get paid to read, and I read everything I can get my hands on. As a contributor to the Weekly Standard, of course, I read the Weekly Standard. I read the National Review. If I want a good laugh, I'll read Mother Jones or watch MSNBC. I think it's important to view issues on the broadest possible reference plane. In fact, I think if you firmly believe in any issue, I urge you to read the opposite. There's an evolution of thought. Now, most times I think it'll merely reinforce your original beliefs, but every once in a while, on the rare occasion, it might change your mind. And in order to construct an argument, you really have to know the opposite side of that argument. Either way, I think you'll have a larger and more comprehensive view of the issue, and I think that's important. I believe it's important to understand all sides of an issue, and that entails knowing the contrary view. I'm a believer in the statement, know thine enemy, so I'm constantly on the Obama website. Now, editorial cartoonists, we spend our time gathering information, we process the information to draw a conclusion, to draw a cartoon, and hopefully to draw blood. Now, unfortunately, the modern trend in editorial cartooning has been to make simple jokes about current affairs. I think humor without a substantive message, without a substantive statement, diminishes the importance of an editorial cartoon. I'm a big believer of editorial cartooning as journalism. An editorial cartoon is not just a funny picture. A good editorial cartoon is a fine instrument of journalism. At times, I think it's sharp and refined, its message cutting quickly to the point, at times blunt with its dark imagery, seizing the reader's attention. And as with any editorial, the cartoon has a point. That's the most important element. That's what I want to emphasize today. It defines an issue. It tells a story. It challenges hypocrisy. It reveals the best and the worst of humanity. It calls the reader to arms in the battle against the complacent, the lethargic, the evildoers, the indolent body politic, and the champions of the status quo. It exposes the assorted predators of society, and by that I mean politicians. But a good editorial cartoon should not only be well researched, it should be carefully contemplated. So one of the most important aspects of my job is not just deciding which cartoons to do, but which cartoons not to do. And I think I've talked to some of you about it earlier today. The first thing that came to mind was a cartoon on Johnnie Cochran. If you're unfamiliar with Johnnie, he was the guy who defended O.J. Simpson and got him off on the murder case. And when Johnnie died, you know, the big thing in the trial was that Johnnie showed that the glove did not fit on O.J. Simpson. And he said, if the glove don't fit, you have to acquit. So when Johnnie died, the first image that came to my mind was Johnnie at the gates of heaven, and St. Peter was saying, I'm sorry, Johnnie, but if the halo don't fit, we don't admit. Now that's a pretty straightforward cartoon, but upon investigating Johnnie Cochran, I found a guy who was engaged in many charitable causes and very, very generous. And it seemed unfair to define him on one issue. So I took a pass on the cartoon. Another example is the Space Shuttle Challenger, where 7 American heroes died. A lot of people lay the blame to that catastrophe on the fact that NASA's efforts to curb spending and cutting corners had created this safety problem. And so the idea that came to mind was showing little pieces of the shuttle flying across the sky with a bubble coming out of one of the little pieces saying, man, these NASA cutbacks are killing us. It's a legitimate point. But 7 American heroes died. And it wasn't worth to have this cartoon overshadowed by the controversy surrounding that element of the cartoon and obscuring the point that I was trying to make. An editorial cartoon isn't humorous for the sake of humor. It's not controversial for the sake of controversy. It's neither conservative nor liberal, whether you agree with it philosophically or not. A good editorial cartoon engages the reader in debate. It informs and it challenges. It draws the reader into the democratic process. And I think editorial cartoons should do more than offend, but I also believe that the right to offend must be defended. You know, we talked a little bit about Charlie Hebdo and the Paris attack. There's a quote often attributed to Voltaire, but it's actually Evelyn Beatrice Hall, who says, I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. This freedom of information must always be protected. John Milton in 1644 said, give me liberty to know, to utter, and to argue freely according to conscience above all liberties. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, which was approved by the National Assembly of France in 1789, written by Marquis de Lafayette, declared that freedom of speech was a natural, unalienable, sacred right of man. The idea of a universal freedom of speech has been around for 4 centuries. And you know, we've seen the Hustler case versus Falwell. Even obnoxious speech has to be protected. The reason being that in a governing democratic republic, this free flow of information is so very important to protect our liberties. We've seen with this administration vociferous assertions that the war on terror is over Al-Qaeda is on the run, even assuring us in the last State of the Union that the shadow of crisis has passed, and we've turned our page on terror. And President Obama said over and over repeatedly that the world is a safer place, none of which is true. And this is an administration that can't even use the words radical Islam. And it's a naive belief that disengagement from the world is going to make America safer. Our policy of leading from behind has left a vacuum of power that's been quickly filled with chaos and malfaction. Now imagine a world that did not have the freedom, or the journalists, or the editorial cartoonists, and a free and unrestrained press to point that out. As the light of liberty is dimmed, so are the prospects for a peaceful and safer world. I think this tragedy in Paris demonstrates the need to shine the light of exposure on those who subvert religion to justify brutal acts of barbarity. And only when the world can see clearly these people for what they truly are will the world unite against these emissaries of death. So whether you agree with the cartoons or not is immaterial. Freedom must endure. You know, in the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." But while these rights are indeed endowed by a Creator and guaranteed by our Constitution, it is government that upholds these liberties, and it is men who constitute the government. There are those who believe that the Constitution is merely a starting point for negotiation. James Madison wrote, "I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of people by gradual and silent encroachments by those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations." I think we're clearly seeing evidence of that today. Journalism, editorial cartoons are a check to the erosion of our liberties and part of the first line of defense to the advance of the unrestrained power of government. One good editorial cartoon can have a significant impact on the political dialogue of the day. If done well, I think it can influence those who govern to govern responsibly and expose them when they do not. You know, Einstein once said, "Two things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity," and I'm not sure about the universe. Einstein was right. It's this axiom which makes political cartooning so important. These people who ultimately govern will make mistakes. They're human after all, most of them anyways. But history has demonstrated that power can turn leaders into monsters, and editorial cartoonists will gladly point out the shortcomings of the powerful in an effort to keep them human. There's a reason our founding fathers included the right to a free press in the First Amendment of our Constitution. Information is a necessary component to guide you in a political system based on self-governance and individual liberty. Information is power. I think we talked a little bit about it in some of the classes today. Imagine if you knew about this little computer company called Apple Computer back in 1980, when you could purchase 100 shares of its IPO at $22 a share. It'd be worth close to $500,000 today. Thomas Jefferson once wrote, "Our liberty depends on the freedom of the press. Then that cannot be limited without it being lost." You know, I think a free press is a check to government power. It's the daylight in the dark arena of politics. It provides the voter with information to decide their own future. But frankly, the press has to do its job. And unfortunately, it seems like the only people more incompetent than this administration seems to be the Washington Press Corps. You know, a reporter's job is to be the purveyor of fact, to point out the injustices of the world, and to shine the hot spotlight of exposure to wound the perpetrators of those injustices with the truth. Editorial cartoonists, we just go back and shoot the wounded. Now, I need to make a distinction here between the objective news reporting segment of journalism and the subjective editorial page. I always find it funny when people call me up and they say, well, they don't call me Mr. Ramirez, they call me other names. But they say, you are way too opinionated. And I have to explain to them, that's why I'm on the opinion page. And I understand why, because it's hard to distinguish between the two. That's the failure of today's journalism. The truth is the mainstream media does an awful job. I think that's why people trust the media less than they trust the politicians, if you can imagine that. It's a factor in, I think, circulation's going down. I mean, obviously there's the advent of new technology, and there's a convergence of media where people are relying on the web for information. But why would you want to pay for misinformation when you can just get it for free on the web? There's widespread speculation and manipulation going on in the media. It's kind of traversed from gathering information to infotainment, and I'm opposed to that. You know, I gave a speech down at the Reagan Library, and during the anniversary of Ronald Reagan last year, they were talking a lot about what a great communicator Ronald Reagan was, but there was much more to Ronald Reagan to that. But from the media, that's all you would really hear. I think he was perhaps the greatest president of modern times. And he provides us a good lesson in presidential leadership. Now, true, it was his oratorical skill that made Reagan such a potent force, but it was his ideas and unwavering belief in America's greatness that made him great. Now, if you've been to the Reagan Museum, they have a little clip where Reagan's hosting a bunch of editorial cartoonists at the White House. I just happen to be one of them. I'm in the second row. I actually had hair back then. But one thing I loved about Ronald Reagan was his sense of humor. The joke he told that day was about the difference between the United States and the Soviet Union, democracy versus communism. And he said the difference between the United States and the Soviet Union is that in the United States, political cartoonists can draw cartoons of the President of the United States. In the Soviet Union, political cartoonists must draw cartoons on the President of the United States. You know, Ronald Reagan was essentially an editorial cartoonist, but with words. His jokes were funny, but they always had a cogent point. Take the resurrection of the Cold War now with Putin, and the Cold War with the USSR. On March 8th, 1983, Ronald Reagan declared the Soviet Union the evil empire. The reaction was immediate. A blanket of condemnation arose from the political pundits and the mainstream media. Critics and conventional wisdom called Reagan's remarks unpresidential, an abrogation of diplomacy. They characterized him as a doddering old man, barely in charge of his mental faculties, who was unaware of what he was saying. Of course, they said much, much worse. But in the most remote part of Siberia, deep in a gulag, in a dark, damp, and dingy cell, a sympathetic guard leaned over to a political prisoner, a Soviet dissident, and he quietly whispered between the iron bars of his cell, President Reagan has just called the Soviet Union the evil empire. That statement hung there in the air for a moment, and the guard left him in the darkness of his cell. And quietly, the metallic sound of a worn spoon tapped against stone, repeating the news in Morse code, which echoed along the walls of the gulag. Ronald Reagan has called the Soviet Union the evil empire. One spoon tapping out the hopes of those imprisoned in the darkness. One spoon followed by another, and followed by another, until it burst into a cacophony of defiance. See, words have meaning. And Reagan's words marked the beginning of the end of the Soviet Empire. Reagan was a crusader against evil, and he boldly challenged Mr. Gorbachev, tear down the wall. And it did. Words have power. But words are only powerful if they're pursued with meaning and purpose, commitment and action. And the collapse of the Soviet Union was only one facet of Reagan's achievements. He provides a good model of the path back for America. And remember, America was suffering under Jimmy Carter. And what Reagan did was he took us from the darkness. He restored funding and established a strong national defense and advocated a diplomatic policy of peace through strength. He pledged to reduce government programs. He pushed a 25% across-the-board tax cut in income taxes, the largest in history. He stopped apologizing for U.S. wealth and U.S. might, and he projected America's greatness. He was a free market capitalist. But what Reagan believed in more than anything was the power of the people, not the institution of government, that the exceptional nature of America lied within its exceptional people. It was a uniquely American idea. Rather than apologize for America, he made America believe in itself again. He believed in the power of the people rather than the government to find the answers to our problems. Reagan believed that the government would just get out of the way, Americans could provide the solutions. In comparison, you look at the Obama administration. This is what my book is on. I was trying to think of what the title was going to be when I first got together with Simon & Schuster. They rejected conservatives are from Mars, progressives are from Uranus. They rejected the illustrated guide for impeachment. But I start off the book by saying the Peter principle is when a person's elevated to their level of incompetence. The Obama principle is when that person gets elected president of the United States. You know, it's kind of funny. Everybody's lauding Donald Trump for his bluntness and obnoxiousness. I've been doing that for my entire career. You know, I'm an equal opportunity offender, but with this administration, editorial cartooning is more like stenography than anything creative. When people ask me, how do you come up with your ideas? I always say, you know, I've got the best gag writer in the world working for me in the Oval Office every single day when he's not on vacation or on a golf course. His policies are the joke. His speeches are the setup, and their failure are the punchlines, except nobody's laughing because it hurts far too much to laugh. Einstein once said, intellectuals solve problems, geniuses prevent them, Obama creates them. Remember when Obama's chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, said, you never want a serious crisis to go to waste? Well, taking those words to heart, his administration has spent 2 terms creating crisis after crisis. You know, I wanted to examine his record, but there's just so much here. We just don't have enough time to pour through it all. These statistics I wrote of when I wrote the introduction of the book, which was about a year ago. But just to show you the disaster that we've inherited, and his policy of appeasement and leading from behind has diminished our global reputation, alienated our allies, emboldened our enemies. Islamic extremism and the prospect of terrorism in our post-9/11 world continues to expand when you think about it. 9/11, you know, basically you had 19 guys funded by Saudi millionaires. And now with ISIS, you have about 15 to 30,000 fighters that are circulating through ISIS training camps, learning to kill people, and being imported back into their countries of residence. Radical Islamic groups control more territory now than ever, and Iran controls Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iraq. Worse, Iran has grown ever closer to developing nuclear weapons and that's not even the worst part, starting a nuclear arms race in a region that's awash in oil money but lacks reverence for human life. Look, mutually assured destruction is not a deterrent to those who are willing to die for their cause. And there are 13 additional nations in the African continent and the Middle East that are now pursuing nuclear technology. When you expand that number of 9 nuclear nations to, you know, the low 20s, to people that don't believe that human life is that important, it becomes a very dangerous world. China has begun to flex its muscles and threaten its neighbors. Russia has invaded hers. Under President Obama, the world's become a much more dangerous place, especially for Americans. And when you think of domestic policy in our economy, the U.S. household median income levels dropped 12% in the 6 years between 2007 and 2013. By 2013, incomes had dropped twice as much during the recovery than it did during the recession. More than 48 million Americans are living in poverty, including 1 in 5 adults. 65% of children are living in households which receive 1 or more forms of federal aid. 46.4 million Americans are on food stamps. The labor participation rate is the lowest since 1978. The U6 unemployment rate is 11.5%. During the Obama administration, we witnessed the first ever credit downgrade in U.S. history. During the Obama administration, we witnessed the second ever credit downgrade in U.S. history. And for what purpose? They wanted to alleviate this financial gap between the wealthy and the poor. But we've seen a dramatic increase in income inequality. Black and minority families have been hit the hardest. The wealth of white households was 13 times the median wealth of blacks in 2013, which is 7 times greater than in 2010. The root cause of all of this has been the substantial growth in government regulations, subsidies, programs, just big government. And now they want to give everybody free college. I know that's a good idea for you guys. But we have $128 trillion in unfunded liabilities from our current entitlement programs and $20 trillion in debt. De Tocqueville once said, "The American Republic will endure until the day Congress discovers that it can bribe the people with its own money." I wonder what de Tocqueville would say if you ever met President Barack Obama. I was going to list I was going to go through the list of economic failures, but it's just too long to go through. I was going to also name all the things he blamed, but that's even longer than the list of failures. And I was going to mention the scandals, but that's twice as long as that. You know, it's amazing what this president's been able to get away with. I think it's been the most unlawful, anti-constitutional administration we've had in a long time. We were just talking about over dinner about how this administration has taken Americans out of a presidential election cycle for 2.5 years with no consequences whatsoever. That's not supposed to happen in the United States. That happens in Venezuela. You know, the president's abuse of executive authority has taken to new heights of lawless behavior. You know, for a constitutional professor, I wonder if he ever heard of Montesquieu or the separation of powers. Even liberal constitutional scholar and George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley called President Obama the president Richard Nixon always wanted to be. I think it's a national disgrace. I think it's time to get to the truth. I think newspapers and the media have an obligation to give you the truth. Not a filtered version of the truth, not a politically correct version of the truth, but simply the truth. Now, we're all human beings, and most of the journalists are. Therefore, they will undoubtedly have their own interpretation of events. But I think that's what makes it so important to cover an issue in its entirety. Differing perceptions can easily color an issue. Let me give you an example. Sherlock Holmes and Watson went on a camping trip. And as they lay down to sleep, Holmes turned to Watson and he said, "Watson, look up into the sky and tell me what you see." And Watson thought about it for a minute and he said, "Well, I see millions and millions of stars." And Holmes said, "Well, what does that tell you?" And Watson replied, "Well, astronomically, it tells me that there are millions of galaxies and potentially billions of planets. Theologically, to create something as magnificent as this, there must be a God. And God is great and we are small and insignificant. Meteorologically, it tells me, well, it's a beautiful, clear evening sky. It's probably going to be a beautiful day tomorrow." Then Watson turned to Holmes and he said, "What does it tell you?" And Holmes looked up and he said, "Somebody stole our tent." We have a participatory democratic republic, the best system of governance in the world, truly a government by the people, for the people, of the people, but only if the people participate. I have to tell this joke because I just like it. There was this duck, and he went into the store and he waddled up to the manager and he said, "Got any grapes?" And the manager looked at this duck and he said, "No." The duck said, "Oh," and walked out. 10 minutes later, this duck comes waddling in, goes up to the manager and says, "Got any grapes?" The manager looks at the duck and he goes, I said, no, we have no grapes. Duck goes, oh, walks out. 10 minutes later, the duck comes waddling in, goes up to the manager, says, got any grapes? The manager goes, what is wrong with you? I have no grapes. I will never have grapes. I have no fruit department, no grapes. Duck goes, oh, walks out. 10 minutes later, the duck comes waddling in, goes up to the manager and says, got any grapes? The manager says, what is wrong with you? I don't like grapes. I don't like ducks. Get out of my store. Duck goes, oh, walks out. 10 minutes later, the duck comes waddling in. The manager goes, hold it right there, duck. If you ask me for grapes one more time, I'm going to nail your little web feet to the floor. Ask me for anything else, but don't ask me for grapes. The duck looked at him and said, got any nails? He says, no. Got any grapes? You see, this joke provides a good working analogy of how I view Washington bureaucracies at work. Because you see, in Washington, D.C., things are not always represented as they truly are. For example, a slower increase in Medicare payments is not called a rational effort to save Medicare. It's called a draconian cut. A balanced budget amendment, which stipulates Congress can only spend the amount of money that the amount of revenue they take in, is not called common sense. It's called extremism. Making illegal immigration illegal is not called following the law. It's called insensitivity. Judging someone not by the content of their character, but strictly by the color of their skin is not called racism. It's called affirmative action. Aborting a human fetus in its third trimester is not called killing. It's called a choice. When governments have a surplus, it doesn't mean we've paid, bless you, it doesn't mean we've paid too much in taxes. It means we've spent too little in services. And a tax is no longer a tax. It's called an investment in America. Now, Vice President Biden said it's a three-letter word, patriotism. There is no global war on terror. It's called an overseas contingency operation. The Fort Hood attack was called workplace violence. They called the Muslim Brotherhood a largely secular group, which has eschewed violence. The Muslim Brotherhood, secular. It has the word Muslim in its name. The Islamic State is neither Islamic or a state. They won't use the word radical Islam or Islamic extremists. And blowing up buildings is no longer called terrorism, it's called a man-caused disaster. Frankly, I think this administration has been a man-caused disaster. And I don't know about you, but I believe in the old adage, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, then it's usually a duck. As an editorial cartoonist, it's my job to nail that duck to the floor. Because someone needs to watch over the Institution for the Intellectually Challenged, the Obama administration, on behalf of the American public. Politicians often forget who they work for. Because of the pomp and circumstance that surrounds these career political celebrities, we're lulled into thinking it is we who work for them when it is the opposite. It is they who work for you. They are public servants. They're elected to do your bidding. And believe me, they are far from infallible. The problem with this country isn't that we pay too little in taxes. It's that we support a government that's gotten too big and too intrusive. Our country was built around the idea of self-governance and independence. But 39% of Americans are on some kind of government program. 1 in 6 Americans are on direct government assistance. 47% of Americans do not pay federal taxes. In the last election, we had less than 58% turnout of all registered voters. If you took the real numbers of the eligible electorate, less than a third, 29%, voted for the president of the most powerful nation in the world. Is this America you want? You guys are the future. It certainly isn't the America that Ronald Reagan envisioned. It's amazing when you look back into history at a small group of colonies united to fight taxation without representation. It's clearly evident now that we face the same challenge. You know, I would much rather be constitutionally correct than politically correct. I think anyone who cannot delineate between radical Islam and Islam, illegal immigration and immigration, an assault rifle and a long rifle, an automatic weapon and a weapon that just looks like an automatic weapon, can't distinguish between the police and criminals, and the lies and the truth, they do not deserve the job as President of the United States of America. There's a quote attributed to George Washington that says, "Government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is a force like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master." I don't think it's actually his quote. But Calvin Coolidge, John F. Kennedy, and Ronald Reagan found the solution to our economic problems rested not in the government, but in the ingenuity of the people. They believed in the doctrine of American exceptionalism. In their eyes, America was a place where the extraordinary could be extraordinary and be rewarded for their success. In turn, their success would create innovations and jobs that benefited the average American and give the average Americans incentives to work hard, to dream hard, to become extraordinary themselves, so that others could simply remain as community organizers. President Clinton believed in an America that could reach for the moon, not reach for the taxpayers' wallets. President Obama can give a good speech, but it takes more than words and a good speech to make a great president. It takes great ideas. Reagan was an exceptional president because he truly believed America was an exceptional country. Ronald Reagan saw America as a shining city on a hill, not just a city among many, many other cities. As we embark on this presidential election cycle, don't be disheartened. I believe in America because I believe in its people. We will find our way. You are the future of America. It is your responsibility as citizens of this grand republic to be informed, to find the truth, find the deep root of what our founding fathers believed in that made America so great. So I'm going to leave you with that challenge, and I'm going to try to inspire you with some cartoons. Can we dim the lights? Can we dim the lights? Thanks. Now, being the capitalist pig that I am, this is my book, so please buy it. My friend Dick Cheney wrote the intro, and it's actually pretty fun. The forward, and it's pretty funny. And Rush did the backwards. This is my website in defense of liberty, michaelpramirez.com. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff. Now, this is why I do my job. This is a picture of Bill Clinton. He's looking over the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. If you look closely at the binoculars, they have the lens caps on. Here's George W. doing the same thing. America's behind you 100%, except on these blackout dates, which include vacations and golf outings and TV shows. Hillary's health problem. He hits her knee. It's a reflex. Building a wall. Confetti, it's Hillary's shredded emails. I was amazing, I know. This is Hillary, which is Obama's third term. Don't worry, it gets worse. This is my view of the Olympics. Now, I thought I'd throw this in because I'm traveling. As part of the TSA efficiency program, those 65 and older do not have to remove their shoes. I was 50 when I got in line. This is a cartoon that I actually did today. Despite America being a country of imperious bullies, racist polluters, and greedy capitalists who torture and want to build walls, I believe we've been a force for good. We determined what started those massive fires. Hillary Clinton's pants. No, liar, liar, pantsuit on fire. Now, I thought I'd throw this in here. This is the evolution of a cartoon. A lot of you had asked me how I do this. And they start off as little gems on cocktail napkins, and they look like this. So I'll think about issues all the time, and I just jot these down. The funny thing about it is it's the image that I see in my mind, and what you're going to see is a transformation from this into a final cartoon, but it pretty much looks the same, except I'm filling in the details. So that's the cocktail napkin. This is what the sketch looks like. And what I do with these sketches on copy papers, I scan them into my computer and I send them to, I have 8 friends that I send the cartoons out to get their feedback. And then I just completely ignore what they say and pick out the ones I like. This is what the initial black and white drawing looks like. And the great thing about a computer is you can manipulate things. I will add a screen on the computer to put this kind of diagonal line stuff on there and give it more depth. And because the newspapers that take my cartoons take both black and white and color, I have to make a separate black and white version of the cartoon, so that's it. To this I add the color base, and I just kind of splash it on. And Photoshop has a wonderful tool where if you hit the open areas, it will cut all the color out that shouldn't be there, and it produces this. And so this is the basic template of a cartoon with its initial color. From there, I'll add color and texture to it, and that's the finished drawing right there. This is my Pulitzer entry from last year. We don't have a complete strategy on ISIS. ISIS does. This is Obama erasing our borders and the courts putting them back. So now political cartoons, they're not always funny. But they should always make you think. This is what Obama meant when he said Al-Qaeda's on the run. Hillary, your email problems are beginning to worry us. You've got jail. And if you'll notice, in my cartoons, I'll just throw a little stuff in there. This is the modern day slavery state. Jerry Brown, the governor of California, reservoirs, what California obviously needs are shorter showers and a high-speed rail. This reservoir is nearly empty. If we were aware of the evil back then, would the world have prevented it? And that's one thing I should tell you about. I just visited Baghdad in October. I've been all throughout Iraq visiting the troops. And Iraq is really, all these cities are separated by long highways. When you go into Baghdad, you leave from Ali Salim Air Base, which is the northernmost air base that we have in Kuwait. And you get there along the 60-mile highway of death. If you remember the first Desert Storm, we had asked the Iraqis to surrender. Instead, they proceeded to go northward through Kuwait and rape and pillage their way through the country. So we caught them out in the open highway and obliterated them. Now, the first time I looked up ISIS and Googled it, the first image that I got was an 8-year-old little girl in a Sunday dress who'd been beheaded. Now, obviously the president was more privy to far worse stuff than that. And he must have known ISIS is basically the reconstituted forces of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Saddam's old military corps. And he must have known they're coming from the northern border, and they could have caught them out in the open and just obliterated them before they reached the oil fields, before they started taking towns. This is a tragedy. The evolution of man to Caitlyn Jenner. So Obama taken to the cleaners on the nuclear deal. I think I get a good nuclear deal in hand. The Planned Parenthood fetal harvest chart. Refugee roulette. And you know, we were talking about this during dinner too, that we need to make a distinction between immigrants and refugees. I think refugees, because you can't really vet them. I mean, it's really, you know, which relative do you want to die, to sacrifice, to ensure this? You can set up a safety zone in the territories near the countries where they can be safe until they return back to their country. This is the lack of fiscal responsibility by Greece, and a portrait of America's future. The State Department claimed that the lack of jobs were behind the rise of ISIS. Here's a guy saying, I couldn't get a job beheading people in the private sector. This is the Sanchez who shot that gal in San Francisco, and the people that are culpable in the murder, which is the Obama immigration policy and the sanctuary city policy. This is the Clinton Foundation, bags and bags of foreign money. Mutually assured destruction only works when the other side doesn't want to die. Weekend at Bernie's. She's just passed out, though. How dare you call us a do-nothing Congress? Why, I oughta. Mr. President, you may not believe in radical Islam, but radical Islam believes in you. And this is for the Paris attack. The pen is mightier than the sword. This is my book. There's more. This is a young Barack Obama. All those cartoons were in my entry from last year. These are in the book. This is Barack Obama. And if you notice all the questions, the answer is government, except for one. Democracy is a form of social inequality. He certainly has a lot of Secret Service for protection. Those are journalists. The imperial president. Congress is in session when I say it is. Good news, Captain. We have a full ship, 7.1 million passengers on the Obamacare Titanic. And this is your new doctor, Karl Marx. Give me liberty or give me a government bailout. De Blasio's New York City. When Cheryl Atkinson left CBS News, she took the C and she left the BS. I was dead broke. That'll be $200,000, please. What do you call doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results? California. This is the Gosnell Clinic tragedy with the aborted babies. Never again. Relax, I'm only going to hit him on the upper 2% of his body. And we were talking about this earlier. Remember, you were asking me how long it takes to do a cartoon. This was really quick because there's just nothing but garbage back there. None of that medical equipment really exists. It's just stuff that's lying around my office. Why I have that kind of stuff lying around my office is another question. The mountain of debt, someday all this will be yours. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult. It's very complicated. Cut spending. Made in China. The unemployment line. The Obamacare death panel. Let's start with jobs. Here's Obama's green economy, which has run out of gas. This is how electric cars work. You have to plug them into coal plants to make them work. Global cooling, global warming, climate change, climate disruption, it's called weather. I like the E equals MC hammer. There's all kinds of stuff in there. Something about Al Gore, you'll have to find it. Extinguishing the light of liberty through the EPA. Now Nancy Pelosi they're gonna rename a street after her. These are my suggestions. Here she is again. I've drained the swamp of Washington corruption. I'm sorry, Miss Warren, but Bolsheviks are not an Indian tribe. Never mind, it's not a red line, it's just blood. The reset button. Negotiate for a couple more weeks. We suspect China may be stealing information. The Obama administration, Iran nuclear policy, autocrats, despots, and terrorists start your programs. Attention, everyone, as you go into battle, the most important thing for you to know is Jones here is gay. This is when we caught bin Laden. Beating swords into food stamps. This is abandoning Iraq. Don't forget your golf clubs, Mr. President. So you want to use, yeah, no, that's exactly what it is. In fact, you utilize, I was going to say, you utilize iconic images that people can relate to make the point. And when people look at that, they think of the abandonment of Vietnam. Here we have the abandonment of Iraq. We recommend boots on the ground. 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 Obama has the boots over his ears so he doesn't have to listen to them. Remember I was talking about the little stuff that I put in the Oval Office, like the I love me, and all the pictures in the background are of his loved ones? Yeah. The knight in shiny armor. You didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen. King George III built the roads. This is my illustration of Chris Matthews, the left one. You wonder why he has a tingle up his leg. Limited government, you bunch of extremists. We, the government. The tip of the iceberg, I still can't get on the website. The selfie. Obama as Nero. To the Foley family, I want you to know all my thoughts are with you. Of course, he went out to play golf that same day. Jimmy Carter, thank you. Oh. The Fading Light of Liberty. Now, this is my first book. Everyone has the right to my opinion. I'm going to show you some cartoons. You can kind of see the evolution of the style over the years. The 94 Pulitzer collection, it depends on what the meaning of is. William Jefferson Clinton. This is on U.S.-Japan trade. Aren't they supposed to face you when they bow? And in light of the modernization of society, we'd like to renegotiate the 10 Commandments down to 4.5. Moral values, if it were not for reporters, I would tell you the truth. Chester A. Arthur. This is our moral fabric. I think this is my favorite cartoon because it's concise and immediate. Father, you can't say prayers during graduation ceremonies, but if you print them on condoms, we'd be happy to distribute them. What I wanted to do on Father's Day, meet my father. It's about the 47% illegitimacy rate in Memphis, Tennessee. There's a black man with a black kid, a white man with a white kid. The black man's thinking white, the white man's thinking black. The kids are going, look, another kid. Unsupervised children sliding into gangs. You two here to be married? Yes. We'll step up and be counted. Why society would try to impose its moral values on us is beyond me. It's perfectly natural for two people in love to want to get married. Your father should be proud of you. He is my father. When Elliot Spitzer had his news conference, I thought they should put the microphones where his brain was. Hollywood, you can fool all the people some of the time and some of the people all the time, but you cannot fool all of the people all of the time. Abraham Lincoln. In ancient times, people worshiped the stars out of ignorance. Who would callously glamorize drugs and tobacco just for profit? Hollywood. Son, your father and I have decided not to let you watch television anymore because it promotes violence. Touch my remote and I'll kill you. Remember when Michael Jackson was holding the baby over the banister? This is what the baby was thinking. Michael Jackson's my father. Oh, please let go. Here's his sister Janet. And the wardrobe malfunction. Today on Martha Stewart Living, I'll be demonstrating how to cook your own goose. Junior, it's time to take your Lipitor. Not now, Mom, I'm playing baseball. I'm not just a reader of the news. Pause next paragraph. Marlboro country. Because of the soaring cost of medical malpractice insurance, we don't have any doctors left. However, rest assured we have the best lawyers operating on you today. This is when the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against the Pledge of Allegiance. Bryce and Bobo the Clown was all booked up, so we got the next best thing. Are you really from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals? Viva bilingual education. And here to share his personal success story through bilingual education is Miguel. Okay? We need better immigration laws. Profiling is politically incorrect. Besides, they pose no real threat to us. Well, you have a slight temperature. We're not sure why, so we're going to have to amputate your legs. Freeze. Homicide, burglary, worse. Trans fat. Raise your hands and step away from the chicken. Here's Barry Bonds trying to fill Babe Ruth's shoes, proving that steroids do not make you bigger. This is a U.S. border fence with a service entrance. The business of America is business, Calvin Coolidge. I'm okay, I landed on a taxpayer. I wish we had free medical care like in Cuba. I wish we had good medical care like in the United States. Remember, Fidel imported his doctor from Spain. Government is not reason. Oh, you heard that quote by George Washington. This is some of my favorite time, the Clinton administration. This is the parking meter in the Lincoln bedroom. The stain. I did not have factual relations with the American people. Like I'm the one who needs to be neutered. This is the Clinton Memorial. See his pants around his ankles. This is the Clinton autobiography with the pullout. I think that's Miss May. This is the U.S. Senate Republicans at the trough, feeding trough. Now, Nancy Pelosi, as Speaker of the House, wanted her own form of transportation. She wanted her own jet. I thought she had her own form of transportation already. Jimmy Carter. This is anatomically correct, by the way. Nothing brings out the lower traits of human nature like office-seeking, Rutherford B. Hayes. This is Kerry Sutra on the many positions of John Kerry. Is there anything in the wardrobe to make him look thinner? Here's the answer, Ronald Reagan 100 times. Dennis Kucinich, of course I've seen a UFO. How do you think I got here? We are a nation that has a government, not the other way around, that makes us special among the nations of the earth, Ronald Wilson Reagan. Yes, Elian, someday all this will be yours. Is Russia reverting back to Soviet-style oppression? You're darn Putin. The United Nations, and giving my allowance. Putin, what's the matter? Never seen a dolphin before? I got into a lot of trouble for this cartoon. This is Iran and the spread of chaos and terrorism. If a civilization is to survive, we must cultivate the science of human relationships, the ability of all peoples of all kinds to live together in the same world at peace. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is the first intifada. How dare you defend yourself? Now imagine if we had rockets coming over the border from Tijuana, hundreds and hundreds of rockets. What would America do? The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. This is a cartoon I did on September 11th. The lack of coordination between the intelligence agencies, I got it. I've never seen a pessimistic general win a battle, Dwight D. Eisenhower. This is before the Iraq war. She's saying, run. This is the case against Saddam. Now, when I was in Baghdad, I was at the Ba'athist headquarters. All the Ba'athist headquarters in the major cities had swimming pools. This one had blood stains on the swimming pools. It was never filled with water. 50,000 reasons why the world is better off without Saddam Hussein, bless you. This is a 2008 Pulitzer collection, or part of it. I have no idea what it is, but I feel strangely attracted to it. Excuse me, but I'm going to need that to run my car. This is the Great Wall between product safety inspections and Chinese factories. I pledge no more personal attacks on my drug-addicted, possibly Muslim opponent. This is the CBS anchor. Fashions for the ignorant celebrity. You see, words have meaning. Icons have meaning as well. For the last time, if you don't tell us where you planted the nuclear device, we'll have no choice but to appoint a lawyer for you. This is the difference between the ATM and the AMT. Now, I love this cartoon because it's based on a true story. Meet Sheryl Crow. She only uses 1 square of toilet paper per bathroom visit to fight global warming, and she's holding her hand out. And the guy doesn't want to shake it. Can you turn up the lights, please? Look, you know, I love Hillsdale. You guys are doing great things here, and you are truly the future leaders of America. And as you look toward your future, realize that everything you do will have an effect on the world around you. I think America is an exceptional country because the exceptional roots, this grand experiment that we established our foundation on. And I think all of you, when you get a chance, should revisit those foundations. Hillsdale is an excellent place to do that, to find out what makes America extraordinary. And what makes America extraordinary is all of you. So I leave this challenge to you because I want somebody to pay for my Social Security. So I thank you for having me here. Okay, questions?
Two questions and then I'll be done.
Yeah. Questions? Yes?
You know, I'm climbing because I love your work. I've been following for years.
Well, thanks.
Have you ever given any thought to making the entire library of work available digitally? Because as an educator, where I use your work is in teaching, and I need to put it up on a screen so I can show a classroom.
Let me get your email first off so I can send you a bill. No, I'm just kidding. Well, thanks. You know what? Melissa's in charge of my website, and we're slowly constructing the archives of the website.
What Professor Buttridge means is he'd be happy to have a Hillsdale College paper.
That's a good idea, but you know, for the time being, you can actually buy my 2 books and get a pretty good, significant collection there. But that is a great idea. And sometime when I'm not focusing on making political cartoons, we'll see if maybe Melissa and I can work on that and get that done. Because we want to increase traffic on the website too, so I'm sure there's something we can figure out. You know, unfortunately, the LA Times had a very big archive, not only of the cartoons I did for the LA Times, but the ones I did at Commercial Appeal. But when we severed that relationship, they severed that website. So, but The book's chock full of them. Any other questions? Is it warm in here? It is a
Michael
little warm.
Ramirez, thank